kick back off. The next speaker in our security and usability track is Greg Smith. Greg is the Director of Identity and Access Management at Johnson & Johnson Information Technology. He has global responsibility for delivering authentication, authorization. I swear to God, I'm hot. There we go. and just the mic, by the way. Greg is the Director of Identity and Access Management for Johnson & Johnson Information Technology, where he has global responsibility for delivering authentication, authorization, and access governance solutions. Take it away, Greg. So Captain America, Bucky, and Thor walk into a bar. I don't have the rest of the joke. That's just a setup for the next Marvel movie.
I promise to give it back. Okay, you can start my countdown clock. I'll just use this. Thank you all for coming. As Laura said, my name is Greg Smith, and I'm with Johnson & Johnson Information Technology in Information Security and Risk Management. And I also have a couple members of my team here in the front row to heckle and to keep me on point. So before I get into the story, what follows is a disclaimer, because I'm required to say this. And this presentation is an overview of our journey over the past year, migrating from one multi-factor authentication solution to another. Nothing herein should be construed as an endorsement of any particular vendor or product. This is the story of what we chose, how we did it. Most of what follows is generally applicable, I hope, to what you might be doing, whether it's implementing a greenfield solution or migrating from one solution to another, and that's regardless of product. And of course, your mileage may vary. Now, Johnson & Johnson, as you may know, is a global healthcare leader. We have more than 265 operating companies doing business in more than 60 countries worldwide. And right now we employ approximately 126,500 employees. We're the world's 6th largest consumer health company, the world's most comprehensive medical devices business, the world's 6th largest biologics company, and the world's 5th largest pharmaceuticals company. And this past weekend, Barron's released their list of the top 100 most respected companies, and we are #1. Now, as you can imagine, operating on this scale brings a number of challenges. In addition to our employees, we have a small army of consultants, contractors, and constituent workforce who are not direct employees in J&J, and that brings the population of my user base well over 200,000. Now, for a little bit of background, we've had multi-factor authentication for several years, and we implemented it with our legacy single sign-on service, which has since been replaced. We're now using Ping Federate and Ping One Cloud to do all of our single sign-on for both on-prem applications and SaaS vendors hosted on the internet. I think like a lot of you, we have a mix of services that require MFA. This is not everything that we do single sign-on with. Today it's a subset requires MFA. That's likely to change as time passes. But right now we're using Office 365. We've just started deploying that in earnest to our user base. We have Amazon Web Services and their Workspaces virtual PC product. We use Box for cloud storage in addition to OneDrive. Wow, it got loud. We also have F5 gateways that we're using for internally hosted web applications and Juniper gateways for our virtual private network. So it's a nice little mix of things that require MFA for us. And our journey started about a year ago at last year's Cloud Identity Summit. And we're just entering the final year of our contract with our legacy MFA provider. And at that time, we had 25,000 seats, and we were growing because we were mandating use of MFA with cloud storage and the Workspaces platform, both of which were about to start growing in earnest. And we always like to take a look at something before we renew it to make sure it's still the right fit for all of our customers and the right decision to keep going with. And in our case, we decided it was time to consider making a switch. After doing some due diligence and evaluating a number of options and then doing a POC, we decided it would be a good idea for us to migrate to Ping ID MFA. Now for us, the advantages were an enhanced registration experience for our customers. The old product was a bit cumbersome for them to set up and involved typing in long strings of numbers to get things configured. And that was the biggest source of help desk calls, was getting it set up. Ping ID's model, which they're not unique in using, but one of the things they do is using your smartphone's camera, take a picture of a QR code to make a very seamless registration process. And we saw that as a big win for our customers. Anything that makes adoption easier is a win. And for my team, it reduced our vendor complexity by giving us a more integrated solution. Now, the trick was going to be, how could we get there smoothly? Nobody wants to disrupt their business. As we saw in the last presentation, they show up with pitchforks and rope and torches, especially at night. These guys showed up during the day, and they really did show up outside my office. I knew my team could make the technology work. It's what they do. And in fact, when we stood up a POC to see if Ping ID was really going to work, it took under 2 hours. Getting the technology to work was not the problem. The problem for us to move forward was, how do we get all these people off of the old service and onto the new one? Okay, 25,000 seats already. This was a year ago, and forecasted to grow significantly. Wasn't going to be easy. In fact, the numbers said we couldn't do a flash cut. This wasn't going to be, well, today you're using product X and tomorrow you're using product Y. That wasn't going to fly, not with this population. We need to ensure peaceful coexistence between the old service and the new service. And it would have to be for some period of overlap where both services would work, because we needed to allow our customers to migrate at their convenience, whenever that happened to be. And for the bonus round, this opportunity came up mid-year in our project portfolio cycle, which meant it wasn't budgeted, there wasn't funding for it readily available, and we'd have to take it out of HIDE, or what we call base business, do it in your spare time. So we came up with something that looked like a viable approach. First of all, our logon process needed to change. It needed to seamlessly know which back-end MFA service to use for any given user at every authentication. We need to provide a consistent user experience in terms of the web interface that they would see for logging in, whether that's through a browser-based application or an app on a smartphone that pops up a browser window, or if it was something that uses a Radius client like the Amazon Workspaces client. And for us, that meant we had to change our logon process and implement some new custom code that would be able to pick the right MFA backend. In our case, that was a custom adapter that Ping wrote for us based on our requirements. And that adapter would be inserted into our logon framework at the appropriate point so that we can make that choice and use the right backend. But that meant our logon process had to change, that all of our users were very used to and probably loved quite a bit. The old process looked like this. WWID, or WID, is our worldwide ID. It's a unique identifier that we have. Everybody has one for life. We also accept username or email address, whatever they're most comfortable using and remembering. And that's just a custom LDAP filter on the back end that it's a nice little OR LDAP query that finds their unique record in our LDAP directory. We ask for network password and one-time passcode. If they get it right, they get into the app. Our new model would look like this. First, we'd ask for user ID and password. Once they've authenticated that, now we know who they are. And here's where the custom adapter comes in. It makes an API call to the Ping ID backend and sees if this person is set up. If not, we come up with a second prompt. We ask for the OTP from their legacy credential. They enter it, and off they go. But if they are on Ping ID, now we can do something different. We can give them the familiar experience of prompting for that OTP, as we do for the desktop client here. But if they've set up their smartphone as their primary device, we can do a push notification to the phone, which they can authenticate from their phone's lock screen just by swiping and clicking approve, and then authenticate to their phone. It's their phone. They put in their unlock code, or they use their fingerprint for biometrics. Once they do that, they're successfully logged in and ready to go. Okay, so we decided we wanted to do it. We've got a viable path forward. It means my career probably won't be externally redeployed at the end of this. So let's go talk to some stakeholders. Well, we identified them, and naturally 25,000 plus current users of the system. They're all going to be impacted, so that should go over well. We've got application owners, and we've got a bunch of application owners who are relying on radius authentication. And their apps can point to one set of backends, one set of radius servers to do that authentication, but they're counting on those radius servers to know about all their users, regardless of which service they're using, old or new. Well, that meant now we've got to get these app owners on board to switch first before the first person can migrate, or that person's not getting into those services. We needed executive leadership on board, because after all, I'm asking them for out-of-band funding for a project, and I'm asking them to support it when it's potentially going to disrupt the business. We have support teams, customers, and various other interested bystanders, and then we've got the cave dwellers. You might wonder what that is. These are the citizens against virtually everything, and they'll show up at your door with all the reasons that your project is never going to work and will be doomed to failure. Now, I could explain all the reasons this is not a bad idea. Financially, it's a good idea. From the end user experience, it's a good idea. The switch is easy. I had PowerPoints, I had elevator speeches, I had one-on-ones with VPs. But you know what sold it at the end of the day? At the end of these presentations, I asked them, well, would you like to see what it looks like? Of course they want to see what it looks like. The next shiny object is always interesting to executives. So I pull out my laptop, pull out my phone, show them the registration experience with Ping ID. Real fast, a minute or two, they're all set up. I use my phone to scan the QR code on my browser, and I'm in and off to the races. I showed them authenticating on the smartphone to a web app. I had my team set me up with a configuration to put MFA in front of our end user portal. Not the live one, the dev one, but it made the point. And at the end of the presentation, the executives always said, oh, I see, I get that. When can I have that? Because now they want it. And of course, we haven't built it yet. They haven't agreed to fund it. But within about 2 weeks of doing these live, very risky demonstrations off the cuff with senior VPs and my leadership, they were on board. And I knew I had them hooked when my CTO said to me, the execution needs to be flawless. And we all know it never is. So no pressure there. Okay, we're going. We're going to do this. So now we've got to put together a communication plan. And this started months in advance, and it was a long campaign to get my customers comfortable with the idea of making a change. First, we had to get the IT community on board. So newsletter articles on the IT portals, presentations and WebEx sessions on all kinds of different schedules. We did demos at town halls to show how easy and nice this was going to be. We updated the various new hire quick reference cards so our new hire employees could get up and ready right away. We had to coordinate with those relying service owners to make sure they switched first, as I said a few moments ago, and they needed to update their documentation which referenced which MFA solution to install. There's a lot of communications work that had to go on. We made guest appearances at various communities of practice on global schedules, and this meant some late-night WebEx sessions with a beverage at my side. We also have TV screens at a lot of our sites, so we put posters up on those TV screens, coming soon announcements to get people ready and excited about the change. And then we came up with the recorded versions of those demonstrations, because that's always safer than doing a live demo. And we could use those recordings in our end-user communications to show them how to get set up. In fact, those recorded videos were so successful, I got some unsolicited help from out in the business, and they recut a couple of them for me and made them much more professional, much more exciting, put some nice transitions on them, and that was really helpful for getting people on board. And lastly, we had an email campaign. Each user of the legacy system had to be told, in case they hadn't noticed all of our other communications, and a lot of them ignore this stuff, you know that. So you're probably curious, how did things actually go? Well, we closed our deal for Ping ID back at the end of September, after a lengthy internal process and then negotiation. Between October and February, my team worked together with Ping developers to refine our requirements, develop the custom adapters that we needed for registration, for transition, for supporting radius, for doing all those lookups. And one of the more important custom adapters they created for us was what we call the registration adapter. Now, we don't want somebody who's got your user ID and password to set up multi-factor for your account. We'd like to know a little bit more that it's really you setting up multi-factor on your account. So what the registration adapter does is, before you can go and register a Ping ID device, it uses our LDAP directory to look up your user ID and find a phone number for your mobile phone and an email address for your J&J email. We send you a one-time passcode using the Ping ID API to your email or your phone, and you have to put that in before we let you set up a device. Now, we also ran into some challenges with that because it turns out there's a whole group of users using workspaces who are contractors who can't get to their J&J email until they get onto their workspace. And they don't have a J&J mobile phone to get a code that way. So, oops, now we're in a catch-22. Well, fortunately, Ping responded very quickly to our need and gave us some modifications to apply. Now we can, sounds like a fire outside. Now we are able to include two more options. We allow the partner email address, which is already registered in our directory. So now you can pick your partner email address, get your code that way. And we threw in the voice option as a bonus because, at least that way there's one final way you can get your code delivered so you can register and then have strong authentication. But that took us through from October through to February, and also included setting up the new logon experience I showed you earlier, and getting those relying services switched over. Again, they had to switch first before we could move the first person. Migration started in March with a soft launch with our BYOD program, and that helped us test out some of our communications. And then in mid-March, we started the email campaign to individual users. Now, each legacy user got an email with those instructions telling them how to move. And because we're such a large company with a global presence, we always translate our communications into about a dozen languages that are heavy hitters for our user population. Migration was self-service. Each person had to do it for themselves. They'd load the app, go through the pairing process to get registered, and then basically they're done. And it was really as little as 2 to 5 minutes for most people. Of course, there were some people who struggled with that. We'll talk more later. Now, since we were giving them 2.5 months officially to migrate, we knew we'd have to remind them because they ignore the first email and the second. But we tracked the adoption in a database so that we would be able to exclude the people who are done. There's no point in pestering the compliant. They already did what you want. Let's focus on the people who are ignoring you. And throughout this process, remember those stakeholders I mentioned earlier? Well, you need to keep them up to date with how things are going and where you might need help. And if you don't keep them up to date, they will reach out to you. So it's better to be proactive about it. So at this point, I'm really pleased to be able to say there were no major outages, no major complaints. In fact, there were no outages, no major complaints, and we did have the expected volume of help desk calls. And we expected there'd be quite a few. But it was not crippling to our help desk. They got through it just fine. Growth is steady. We made our June 3rd deadline of getting all the web-based multi-factor authentication cut over, and that was just this past Friday. I was hoping to be able to declare a complete victory, but at the last minute we had some panic over 300 Workspaces users who had ignored 6 emails telling them to switch, and also various phone calls. So we're still chasing them down, and they'll be off. That number's coming down very fast. They'll be off within the next 2 weeks. In fact, here's another benefit to keeping your stakeholders up to date and apprised of what you're deciding and what you're doing. When I agreed to the extension on Friday, much as I hated to do it, it was the right thing to do for our business. I informed our CTO of it, and he was supportive. And then he turned around to the guy who was in charge of the service desk causing the panic and said, I support the decision, but no more extensions. So keeping your stakeholders involved is very important. And that brings me to the key takeaways to this project. First and foremost, plan for your deployment from the start. You need to build that into your project plan. There may be things that you need to do to facilitate that deployment, especially if it's a migration from a legacy solution to something new. For example, I mentioned the registration adapter that we had to have, but we also needed those custom adapters to be able to switch between the old service and the new service as people were logging in at each authentication. Not something we don't need to use forever. Now that we've got everybody on the web services cut over, we can switch that. And now if somebody turns up at our site and tries to authenticate not having Ping ID set up, we can direct them to the registration adapter, do an OTP with them, and then let them start registering devices and get up to speed. But if you don't plan from that from the start, you're going to find that out there are a lot of surprises just when you're trying to deploy, and that can derail your project. Make sure you have an extensive communications plan. Now, tech writers are very important when you're writing your instructions and your design documents and all of that. Not to downplay the importance of the tech writer, but you need somebody who can help you market your new service to your customers who are not necessarily IT people or very comfortable with this technology. You need somebody to help you can sell it to all your stakeholders, especially the people who need to start using it. Get to your stakeholders early and keep them informed throughout the project. This is really important. Don't sell this step short. They're the ones who are funding you. They're the ones who are supporting you. And when something goes bump, like those 300 workspaces users I talked about, they're going to support you because you kept them informed. Be ready for pushback at every step of your project. I told you about the citizens against virtually everything. You're going to have people turning up with reasons why they can't make the change. And some of it's legitimate. For example, we had a group of people who had decided to use a shared iPad and a little credit card OTP generator with all the people who shared it to access some of our services. It came out of the woodwork. Fortunately, early enough, we were able to make some adjustments to our plan. But you're going to get pushback, and some of it's legitimate. Some of it's also, just people being uncomfortable with change. In all cases, you need to be able to deal with it patiently and calmly. Make sure you're working with a strong, agile team, not just the people working directly on your project, but also the teams in your company that support you, whether it's network or desktop or mobility teams. And make sure you also have a strong partner who's agile and can help you adjust. As I mentioned, in our case, we needed to make changes to our registration adapter. And the Ping developers were there to help us make those changes and adapt on the fly. So it's really important that you have an agile team throughout. Keep your customers' perspectives in mind. They're not all IT people. I have to remind you of that. We sometimes forget that because we're very comfortable using these technologies. But a lot of people look at these things and it's foreign to them. It's challenging. I mentioned how easy the QR code in the phone's camera is. I had one person who got confused by that. And for some reason, this person kept trying to take a selfie with the camera instead of taking a picture of the QR code. And until we got through that, this person could not get registered. And I can't mention who it is because this person would be very embarrassed, but this sort of stuff happens. These people are not necessarily comfortable with these technologies, and we have to help them through it. And lastly, a successful launch is not the end of the project. It's just the start of your deployment. We launched in March. Great. We're off to the races. We're still not quite done. A couple more weeks and those Radius users will be finished, but we're not done and we can't declare victory yet. And with that, I have a little bit of time for Q&A. Before I open up the floor, I have to remind you all to fill out your session surveys using the app that Andre asked you all to download during the keynote, so don't forget. By all means, feel free to reach out to me during the session, during the rest of the week, if you want to talk more about our migration experience or any other topics. And my email address is here. Feel free to reach out after the conference. And now, Laura will help you ask questions.
Greg is way more advanced than I am. I probably should have said something about filling out session evals. What is up with my mic? And I'm gone. It keeps cutting it out. Does anyone have questions for Greg?
Hi there.
Test 2 1 2. Yeah, it's one of those.
I feel like a rapper. Okay. You mentioned shared devices. Did you support multiple phone numbers or shared phone numbers for MFA?
No, we did not support shared phone numbers for MFA.
Do you plan to?
We don't currently have any plans to do that. The whole point in our philosophy here is that it's something that uniquely identifies you. It's something you have. And if multiple people have that phone number and are trying to use it for MFA, we don't really know for sure it was you. So we lose that accountability. But that's just our opinion.
Any other questions for Greg? Yay, getting my steps in. 1 and then 2.
So in this whole process, did you ever look at, or does it support? It sounds like it supports in-app notification and OTP. Did you look at supporting hardware tokens like FIDO security keys, seen Google and other people using, or did you also look at any biometric solution? Is that part of your roadmap, or did you even look at it?
So biometric specifically, no. My chief information security officer is not a fan. She feels there's a place for them, but definitely not a fan. So We do allow the biometrics on smartphones to unlock them, so that's certainly part of it in terms of doing the authentication, responding to a push notification. As to hardware, we do accept the UB keys because Ping ID natively supports them. And I know some of our users, including myself, really like the UB keys. Not that I'm endorsing anything here, but it's very handy having the UB key Neo stuck in my MacBook so that I can authenticate to my workspace very easily. We also decided that we would support the desktop clients for Mac and Windows, and we support Android and iOS because Ping ID supports those. We also allow SMS, text, email, and voice.
And apparently you answered 2 people's questions in 1 shot.
I'm that good.
This mic is killing me. Does anyone else have any questions?
Testing 1 2.
So the question was, what do you do for people who do not have a cell phone? So that question actually expands nicely to one other thing that we've had 3 requests for so far. People who couldn't run the Ping ID apps on Windows Phone, we let them use SMS text to that phone. People who don't have any cell phone, and we do have them. We also have people who are not willing to give us their cell phone number for SMS text because it's their personal phone. What we allow for registration is your J&J email. So if you can get to that some way, we can send you a registration code that way. We allow an office phone number with a voice call. And for our non-employees, we allow the code to be sent to their non-J&J email address as long as it's been registered with us by their sponsor.
And we're now on our 3rd mic of the afternoon. Does anyone have any final questions for Greg? Actually, we need you to be mic'd up because we're recording the session.
I mean, you have only the one-time password through the phone number. You don't have the option to enroll with the security question and answers?
No, we don't do security questions and answers for MFA. We do that for password self-service. We do allow people to reset their own passwords remotely. With a challenge response of Q&A, they configure 6 questions and have to answer 3 to get passed. But we don't allow that as part of MFA.
I have a
I have 3 seconds.
Okay. We have a project like migrating from the existing vendor to the new vendor. So do you think like the flow is the same? Do you give some insights of that kind of migration? Like,
given I'm over time, why don't we take that offline? It probably is a very similar flow, and I'd be happy to talk to you later.
Thank you very much, Greg. And a working mic, yay. We are going to kick off our final case study of the afternoon at 5:25, which gives you all about 7 minutes to go and find coffee or beverage of your choice.
Thank you, everyone.